dam replacement plan disturbance. There was, for example, a tremendous windstorm here in 1921 called the 21 Blow. And you'll have a chance to see that's an area that was affected by the 21 Blow. So wind, very little fire in that coastal plain, the spruce segment, lots of fire, but of course wind also in the mountain slopes. Almost nothing in the way of insects. And, you know, we can talk about that. It's very peculiar. The moist forests on the west side of the Cascades just simply don't have the kinds of insect pests that devastate stands like they do on the east side. Occasionally you may get a hemlock looper outbreak. Occasionally you'll get an outbreak of Douglas fir bark beetle or Sitka spruce beetle, but they're minor. They aren't stand replacement. Yeah.
I was just wondering if it was might be because it is so wet, do they drown?
We have many hypotheses as to why we don't have bugs. You know, either the bugs just, for the most part, do not devastate these stands. That's one. But, you know, all kinds of hypotheses about predators and parasites. We don't know. We have many ideas and nothing's proven. Yeah. Same question?
My question was more like, do you think it's that maybe other regions that are similarly forested but a little bit warmer? Like, my experience is that it's just not quite as warm as the bugs like it up here or something.
Well, maybe that's right, but there are a lot of bugs that do like it.
Yeah, right.
I can tell you for sure, I made the mistake one time of talking to a group of people about old growth Douglas fir hemlock forest, and I made quite a point about, wow, it's really rich in spiders and other predatory insects. This did not go over very well. This is not a selling point with the public about how good old growth forests are. But they do have, truly, very high levels of predators and parasites. In other words, the invertebrate communities of these forests, these old forests particularly, are just rich in predators and parasites. Okay, so those are the disturbances. Let me talk a little bit now about human interaction. And basically, we assume, you know, that humans arrived here about 8,000 to 12,000 years ago. You know, it's widely debated exactly when they got here, but in any case, let's just roughly say 10,000 years ago, plus or minus. The Native Americans arrived via the land bridge over the Bering Strait. Okay? And basically, almost all the Indian activity and settlement here in this area was right in the coast and along the rivers. So these are ocean, marine-oriented tribes that we have here. And obviously, you know, wow, why would you go very far away from it since it's an incredibly rich source of food? So basically, the Indian cultures are all focused on the nearshore, coastal and river systems. The Native Americans really probably didn't do much modification at all of the upland areas. And Jim Agee, you know, his read on this is that Native Americans really were not major sources of fire, for example, in these forests. They tended to stay right along the coast, and because they were so rich in food sources, they have a very rich culture. They had a lot of time on their hands in the winter, you know, the North Pacific coastal tribes are just incredibly famous for their culture, for their art, for their stories, and they did trade with interior tribes. So there was a lot of trade going on. A lot of it went on through the Columbia Gorge. And the tribes that controlled that trade between the interior and the marine environments were very powerful tribes indeed. Now, there is a break in the culture, and the Makah are here at Cape Flattery. And the Makah tribe is the southernmost of the whaling tribes. It is the southernmost of the true ocean-going tribes that extend from there north through British Columbia into coastal southeastern Alaska. Those are all ocean-going tribes. They had sea-going canoes. They did very much take whales as part of their culture. And so the Makah really find their relatives and connections up the coast on Vancouver Island. And they don't really relate that much to these other tribes at all, of which there were many. And we will be visiting the Quinault Indian Reservation, which is down here, which is a reservation that actually has at least 7 tribes associated with it. And these were coastal tribes and river tribes. They had a lot of cedar culture, but they basically weren't ocean-going in the same sense that the Indians further north were. They very much were fish-dependent, marine and river-dependent for most of their food, but they have a very distinctly different kind of a culture. If you ever have a chance, you should visit the Makah Museum out here on their reservation. Out here, because it is a superb museum that was developed in connection with the excavation of a site. It was a village, Makah village, that was buried by a landslide, and over the last 40 years or so, 50 years, was excavated, and a lot of the materials from that ended up at that. And I learned more about the coastal Native Americans visiting there than probably any other place I've been. So anyway, the Native Americans were perfectly happy with the place, provided, a place to live with lots of food, lots of opportunities to do other things. And then, of course, European settlers showed up. Of course, the first contacts were with ocean-going ships, people like Drake, that first explored along the coast. But subsequently, as we began to settle, particularly here in western Washington, which incidentally was well behind in time from western Oregon. Western Oregon was really the focus point for settlement in the period of 1830 to 1860. And there was nothing in western Washington at that time except where it was tributary really to western Oregon. But as the Puget Sound region finally began to get settled up, we began to actually get settlement here on the peninsula. And obviously, it's pretty much all related along the coast. It happened first here and last here because this was a very remote area. There was, of course, also a lot of settlement in areas like Hope, William, Aberdeen, where you had a harbor so that you could access things. So a lot of this land was not taken up by anybody. And eventually, of course, the federal government made a settlement of sorts with the Native Americans, establishing some reservations with them. And the other land was kind of open for homesteading, and there were a number of homesteads established along this area, the lower elevations. But not a lot, and they really weren't particularly productive, so the settlement came slowly here. Consequently, the majority of the peninsula was still in federal hands, when we begin to establish forest reserves.